In the quiet hours before dawn on September 8, 2022, as Queen Elizabeth II drew her final breaths at Balmoral Castle, a secret conversation took place between the monarch and her closest confidant. What was whispered in those precious moments would forever change the destiny of a small, seemingly ordinary tiara tucked away in the Tower of London's most secure vault. This wasn't just any piece of royal jewelry. It was a tiara with a story so extraordinary that it had been deliberately hidden from the world for over 7 decades. The tiara in question belonged to Princess Charlotte, the spirited young daughter of Prince William and Catherine. But what the world didn't know was that this delicate crown of diamonds and pearls held within its intricate design the key to understanding Queen Elizabeth's most profound regret, her greatest triumph, and the secret promise she made to secure the future of the monarchy itself. As news of the Queen's passing spread across the globe, millions mourned the loss of Britain's longest reigning monarch. Yet hidden within the protocols of royal succession and the carefully choreographed ceremonies that followed, lay a truth so powerful it would rewrite everything historians thought they knew about the House of Windsor. The story begins not with Charlotte, not even with Elizabeth, but with a young woman whose name was erased from royal records, whose sacrifice shaped a nation, and whose legacy lived on in the most unexpected way possible. What you're about to discover will challenge everything you believe about duty, sacrifice, and the price of wearing a crown. This is the untold story that connects 3 generations of royal women across a century of secrets. And it all begins with a promise made in wartime London that would echo through the decades to find its ultimate fulfillment in a little girl who doesn't yet know she carries the hopes of a kingdom on her small shoulders. The year was 1943, and London trembled under the weight of another air raid. In the basement of Buckingham Palace, a young Princess Elizabeth clutched a leather journal to her chest while bombs fell like deadly rain above them. But this wasn't just any journal. It belonged to her aunt, Princess Mary Adelaide, a woman whose existence had been carefully erased from official royal records decades earlier. Princess Mary Adelaide had been Queen Victoria's great-granddaughter, born in 1898 to Prince George and Princess May, who would later become King George V and Queen Mary. She was Elizabeth's father's younger sister, beautiful, intelligent, and beloved by the people. But Mary Adelaide possessed something that terrified the royal establishment of her time. She had a voice, and she wasn't afraid to use it. During the First World War, while her brothers served on the front lines, Mary Adelaide did something unprecedented for a royal woman of her era. She disguised herself as a common nurse and worked in the field hospitals of France, saving lives and witnessing horrors that would haunt her forever. When she returned to England in 1917, she was no longer the obedient princess who had left. She had seen too much suffering, too much inequality, and she began to speak publicly about the need for social reform. The royal family was horrified. This was an era when princesses were meant to be seen and not heard, to smile prettily and cut ribbons at charity events. Mary Adelaide's passionate speeches about workers' rights, women's suffrage, and the need to rebuild Britain as a more equal society after the war sent shockwaves through the establishment. The press, still deferential to the monarchy in those days, was instructed to ignore her completely. But Mary Adelaide refused to be silenced. In 1920, she made a decision that would seal her fate and change the course of royal history forever. She fell in love with Captain James Morrison, a war hero from a middle-class family who shared her vision for a better Britain. When she announced her intention to marry him, the royal family faced their greatest crisis since the English Civil War. King George V was furious. Queen Mary was devastated. The idea of a princess marrying so far beneath her station was unthinkable. They offered Morrison money, titles, anything to walk away. When he refused, they threatened him. When that failed, they made him an offer he couldn't refuse. They would destroy him utterly, ruin his family, and ensure he never worked again if he went through with the marriage. Morrison, a man of principle but not unlimited courage, finally broke under the pressure. He left England without a word of explanation to Mary Adelaide, leaving behind only a letter that she would carry with her for the rest of her life. The letter spoke of his love for her, his admiration for her courage, but also his inability to be the cause of her destruction or his family's ruin. Mary Adelaide was heartbroken, but her spirit remained unbroken. If she couldn't change the world as a princess, she would find another way. In a move that shocked everyone, She renounced her royal titles, gave up her place in the line of succession, and walked away from the palace forever. The official story was that she had died in the influenza pandemic of 1920. Her name was struck from all records. Her portraits were removed from the palace walls, and for all intents and purposes, Princess Mary Adelaide ceased to exist. But she didn't disappear entirely. Using her mother's maiden name, she became Mary Tech, a social worker in London's East End. She dedicated her life to helping the poor and working for the very reforms she had once advocated as a princess. She lived in a tiny flat above a bakery, wore clothes from charity shops, and found more happiness in her humble life than she had ever known in the palace. Meanwhile, her family tried to forget she had ever existed. Her brother, the future King George VI, was forbidden from speaking her name. Her mother, Queen Mary, locked away all reminders of her lost daughter in a secret room in the palace. But some things couldn't be locked away. Before leaving the palace forever, Mary Adelaide had commissioned a tiara from the royal jewelers. It was to be her wedding tiara, designed with her own specifications. The diamonds were arranged in a pattern that told a story: roses for England, thistles for Scotland, shamrocks for Ireland, and at the center a single large pearl that she had found on a beach in Brighton during the happiest day of her childhood. When she renounced her titles, she left the tiara behind, but not before leaving a letter with it. The letter was addressed to her future nieces, the daughters she would never have, the princesses who would come after her. In it, she wrote about the burden of being a royal woman, about the choices they would face between duty and desire, between what the world expected of them and what their hearts demanded. She wrote about the tiara itself, explaining that each stone had been chosen with purpose. The diamonds represented the light that could shine even in the darkest times. The pearls symbolized the wisdom that comes from pain. And the setting, crafted to look delicate but actually incredibly strong, represented the truth about royal women. They might appear fragile, but they possessed an inner strength that could weather any storm. The letter ended with a promise and a prophecy. Mary Adelaide promised that one day, when the monarchy was ready to change, when the world was ready for a different kind of princess, her tiara would find its way to the right woman. She prophesied that this would happen when a princess was born, who would help bridge the old world and the new, who would represent hope for the future while honoring the sacrifices of the past. Queen Mary, despite her anger and heartbreak over her daughter's choices, couldn't bring herself to destroy either the tiara or the letter. She locked them away in the Tower of London's most secure vault, along with a note of her own. Her note revealed something that even King George V never knew. She was secretly proud of Mary Adelaide's courage. She admired her daughter's willingness to sacrifice everything for her principles, even if she couldn't understand or support her choice at the time. Mary Adelaide continued her work in the East End, never marrying, never having children of her own. She watched from afar as her brother became king, as his daughter Elizabeth grew into a remarkable young woman, as the world changed around them. During the Second World War, when London was burning, she worked tirelessly in air raid shelters and emergency hospitals, saving lives just as she had done in France decades earlier. It was during one of these air raids that fate intervened. Princess Elizabeth, seeking shelter in the palace basement, discovered a hidden panel in the wall. Behind it was a cache of documents and personal effects that Queen Mary had hidden decades earlier. Among them was Mary Adelaide's journal, her letter about the tiara, and most shocking of all, recent letters that proved Mary Adelaide was still alive. The young princess read through the night, learning about the aunt she had never known existed. She read about Mary Adelaide's work with the poor, her advocacy for social reform, her sacrifice of everything she held dear for the sake of principle. By dawn, Elizabeth had made a decision that would shape the rest of her life. She found Mary Adelaide's address and went to see her, alone and in secret. The meeting between the princess and the woman who had given up being a princess lasted for hours. Mary Adelaide, now in her 40s, was still beautiful, but her face bore the lines of hard work and selfless service. She told Elizabeth things about royal life that no one else would dare to say. About the loneliness, the impossible expectations, the way duty could become a prison if you let it. But she also told Elizabeth about the joy she had found in service to others, about the fulfillment that came from making a real difference in people's lives. She spoke about the future of the monarchy, about how it would need to change to survive in the modern world. She talked about the importance of being relatable while maintaining dignity, of being human while fulfilling an inhuman role. Most importantly, she told Elizabeth about the tiara. She explained that she had designed it not just as a piece of jewelry, but as a symbol of everything a modern princess should be. Beautiful but strong, traditional yet adaptable, connected to the past but facing the future. She made Elizabeth promise that when the right time came, when the right princess was born, the tiara would be brought out of storage and given its purpose at last. Elizabeth kept that promise in her heart for decades. When she became queen, she quietly had the tiara moved from the Tower of London to a private vault in the palace. She studied the letter Mary Adelaide had left, memorizing every word. She researched her aunt's life, learning about her charitable work, her principles, her courage. As the years passed and Elizabeth's own children were born, she watched and waited. When Charles proved to be more interested in architecture and environmental causes than royal protocol, she wondered if perhaps he might break the mold. When Anne emerged as a formidable woman who refused to bow to convention, Elizabeth thought the time might be coming. But something told her to wait. The answer came in 2015, when Prince William and Catherine announced they were expecting their second child. Elizabeth, now in her 80s, felt a strange certainty that this child would be special. When Princess Charlotte Elizabeth Diana was born on May 2, 2015, the Queen looked into the baby's eyes and saw something that reminded her of the photographs she had found of Mary Adelaide as a child. A spark of independence, a hint of determination, a suggestion of strength that would not be easily broken. That night, Elizabeth took out Mary Adelaide's letter and read it again. The words seemed to leap off the page with new meaning. The prophecy about a princess who would bridge the old and new worlds, who would represent hope while honoring sacrifice. It all seemed to point to Charlotte, but Elizabeth was cautious. She had learned from Mary Adelaide's story that timing was everything. The world needed to be ready for change, and Charlotte needed to be old enough to understand the weight of the legacy she would be carrying. So Elizabeth waited, watching as Charlotte grew from a spirited toddler into a confident child who showed every sign of possessing the same independent spirit that had made Mary Adelaide so remarkable. The Queen began to prepare for the day when she would pass on Mary Adelaide's story and her tiara. She started writing her own letters, documenting everything she had learned about her aunt, preserving the truth for future generations. She quietly arranged for historians she trusted to begin researching Mary Adelaide's life, preparing for the day when the official story could finally be corrected. But most importantly, she began to observe Charlotte more closely, looking for signs that the little princess possessed not just Mary Adelaide's spirit, but also the wisdom to channel it constructively. She watched as Charlotte showed kindness to servants, curiosity about the world beyond the palace walls, and most tellingly, a natural instinct to help others. The signs were all there, Elizabeth realized. Charlotte was Mary Adelaide's true heir in every way that mattered, but the timing still wasn't right. The monarchy was still adapting to the modern world, still finding its place in the 21st century. Charlotte was still just a child, unaware of the extraordinary legacy waiting for her. As Elizabeth entered her final years, she knew that the moment was approaching when Mary Adelaide's story would finally be told, when her tiara would finally find its purpose, and when the promise made in wartime London would finally be fulfilled. The question that remained was whether Charlotte would prove worthy of the trust that was about to be placed in her young shoulders, and whether the world was finally ready for a princess who embodied everything Mary Adelaide had dreamed of but never been allowed to become. The summer of 2022 brought unprecedented challenges to the royal family. Queen Elizabeth II, at 96, was visibly frail, though her mind remained sharp as ever. Behind the scenes, she was conducting what many would later recognize as a careful orchestration of her final months, ensuring that crucial secrets would not die with her. Charlotte, now 7 years old, had become the Queen's most frequent companion during private moments at Windsor Castle, while the public saw charming photographs of great-grandmother and great-granddaughter sharing tea and stories. What they couldn't see was the careful education taking place. Elizabeth was teaching Charlotte about duty, service, and the weight of history in ways that seemed like games, but were actually profound lessons. During one of their afternoon walks in the castle gardens, Charlotte asked her great-grandmother a question that would change everything. They had been discussing the portraits hanging in the castle corridors, and Charlotte had noticed something odd. "Gon," she said, using her pet name for the queen. "Why are there empty spaces between some of the paintings? It looks like someone used to hang there." Elizabeth stopped walking. For decades, she had dreaded this moment, but also anticipated it. She looked down at Charlotte's curious face, seeing so much of Mary Adelaide in her expression, and made a decision that would accelerate everything. "Would you like to hear a story about a princess who was very brave but also very sad?" Elizabeth asked. Charlotte nodded eagerly. And right there in the garden, Elizabeth began to tell her about Princess Mary Adelaide. She spoke carefully, using words a 7-year-old could understand, but she told the truth. She explained how Mary Adelaide had given up everything to help people who needed her, how she had been erased from the family history, and how she had lived a secret life of service in London. Charlotte listened with the intense concentration she usually reserved for her favorite stories. When Elizabeth finished, Charlotte was quiet for a long moment before asking, was she happy, even though she was sad? The question revealed a wisdom beyond Charlotte's years, and Elizabeth knew then that her instincts had been correct. This child possessed the emotional intelligence and moral compass that Mary Adelaide would have recognized and admired. "I think she found a different kind of happiness," Elizabeth replied. "The happiness that comes from knowing you've made the right choice, even when it's the hardest choice." That conversation marked the beginning of Charlotte's true education in royal responsibility. Over the following weeks, Elizabeth shared more stories about Mary Adelaide, always framing them as tales of a brave princess who chose love and service over comfort and privilege. She told Charlotte about the tiara, describing it as a treasure that was waiting for the right princess to claim it. Charlotte became fascinated by these stories. She began asking questions that surprised everyone with their insight. She wanted to know why Mary Adelaide couldn't be a princess and still help people. She wondered why the family had been ashamed of someone who was doing good things. Most tellingly, she asked whether she would have to choose between being a princess and being kind to people who weren't royal. Elizabeth answered these questions as honestly as she could, explaining that the world had changed since Mary Adelaide's time, but that being royal would always involve difficult choices. She emphasized that Charlotte would have opportunities Mary Adelaide never had, but also responsibilities that Mary Adelaide had understood better than anyone. Meanwhile, Elizabeth was working behind the scenes to ensure that Mary Adelaide's story would survive even if she didn't live to tell it completely. She commissioned a secret project from the Royal Archives, asking them to compile everything they could find about Mary Adelaide's life. What they discovered was even more remarkable than Elizabeth had imagined. Mary Adelaide hadn't just worked as a social worker in the East End. She had founded 3 orphanages, established a network of soup kitchens that operated throughout the Depression, and during World War II had personally rescued dozens of children from bombed buildings. She had written extensively about social reform, publishing articles under pseudonyms in progressive magazines. She had even secretly funded several scholarships for working-class children to attend university. More astonishingly, she had never completely severed her connection to the royal family. Through a network of trusted servants and distant relatives, she had continued to receive updates about her family's lives. She had mourned when her brother died, celebrated when Elizabeth became queen, and had even sent anonymous donations to royal charities for decades. The archivists also discovered that Mary Adelaide had not died alone and forgotten as Elizabeth had feared. She had become a beloved figure in her community, known simply as Miss Mary. When she died in 1978, at the age of 80, hundreds of people attended her funeral, former patients, grateful families, fellow social workers, and people whose lives she had touched in countless ways. Most remarkably, they found evidence that Mary Adelaide had kept track of royal births throughout her life, and had made a prediction shortly before her death that proved eerily accurate. She had told a close friend that she believed the monarchy would soon face its greatest test, but that salvation would come through a small princess with an old soul, who would remind the world that true nobility comes from service, not circumstance. Armed with this information, Elizabeth began to accelerate her plans. She started having private conversations with William and Catherine about Charlotte's future role in the monarchy. She didn't reveal Mary Adelaide's full story yet, but she began to emphasize the importance of raising Charlotte to understand that privilege came with responsibility. William and Catherine, who had already been determined to give their children as normal a childhood as possible, embraced Elizabeth's guidance enthusiastically. They began incorporating more charitable activities into Charlotte's routine, taking her to visit homeless shelters, food banks, and community centers. They were amazed by Charlotte's natural empathy and her ability to connect with people from all walks of life. Charlotte seemed to instinctively understand that these visits were important, not just for the people they were helping, but for her own development. She asked thoughtful questions about poverty, inequality, and how she could make a difference. When she saw children her own age who didn't have enough to eat or proper clothes, she wanted to give them her own belongings. When she met elderly people in care homes, she sat with them patiently, listening to their stories with genuine interest. These experiences reinforced Elizabeth's conviction that Charlotte was indeed Mary Adelaide's spiritual heir. But she also recognized that Charlotte would need more than good intentions to succeed where Mary Adelaide had been forced to fail. She would need the full support of the royal family, the backing of the government, and most crucially, the acceptance of the British people. As 22 progressed and Elizabeth's health declined, she began to feel the urgency of time passing. She started having more explicit conversations with Charlotte about what it meant to be a modern princess. She explained that Charlotte would grow up in a world very different from the one she herself had known, a world where princesses could have careers, opinions, and active roles in shaping society. But she also warned Charlotte about the challenges she would face. The media would scrutinize her every move. People would criticize her choices no matter what she did. She would have to learn to be strong enough to withstand attacks while remaining compassionate enough to serve effectively. Charlotte absorbed these lessons with remarkable maturity. She began to understand that being a princess wasn't about wearing pretty dresses and living in palaces. It was about using your position to help others and make the world better. She started talking about the problems she saw around her and asking what she could do to help solve them when she grew up. One particular conversation stood out to Elizabeth as a turning point. Charlotte had been watching the news coverage of the war in Ukraine and had seen images of refugee children. She asked her great-grandmother why bad things happened to good people and what princesses were supposed to do about it. Elizabeth explained that throughout history, royal women had often been the ones to step forward during times of crisis, to provide comfort and leadership when it was needed most. She told Charlotte about Queen Elizabeth I rallying her troops against the Spanish Armada, about Queen Victoria mourning with her people after tragedies, and about her own mother, the Queen Mother, staying in London during the Blitz to share the dangers her people faced. But what about Princess Mary Adelaide? Charlotte asked. What did she do when people were suffering? Elizabeth smiled, realizing that Charlotte had internalized Mary Adelaide's story so completely that she now saw her as part of the royal pantheon. This was exactly what Mary Adelaide had hoped for, to be remembered not as the princess who walked away, but as the royal woman who found a different way to serve. Elizabeth decided it was time to show Charlotte the tiara. On a quiet afternoon in July, she led Charlotte to the private vault where Mary Adelaide's tiara had waited for over a century. When Charlotte saw it for the first time, her reaction surprised even Elizabeth. Instead of being dazzled by its beauty, Charlotte studied it thoughtfully. She traced the patterns of roses, thistles, and shamrocks with her finger, and when she reached the central pearl, she looked up at Elizabeth with understanding in her eyes. "This is Mary Adelaide's special tiara, isn't it?" she said softly. "The one she made for princesses like me." Elizabeth nodded, feeling tears in her eyes. She hoped that someday there would be a princess who could wear it proudly, who could be everything she wanted to be but couldn't. Charlotte was quiet for a moment before asking, "Will I be able to wear it without forgetting about her?" The question revealed that Charlotte understood something profound about legacy and responsibility. She wasn't just asking about wearing a piece of jewelry. She was asking whether she could honor Mary Adelaide's sacrifice while also forging her own path. Elizabeth lifted Charlotte onto her lap and told her the complete story then, holding nothing back. She explained about Mary Adelaide's love affair, her forced choice between love and duty, her years of anonymous service, and her final prediction about a princess who would change everything. When she finished, Charlotte was quiet for a long time. "Finally," she said, "I think Mary Adelaide would want me to be brave like her, but also to be happy. She didn't get to be happy and a princess at the same time, but maybe I can be both." Elizabeth hugged Charlotte tightly, knowing that this 7-year-old girl had just grasped something that had taken her decades to understand. The future of the monarchy lay not in choosing between tradition and progress, between duty and personal fulfillment, but in finding a way to honor both. As summer turned to autumn and Elizabeth's final weeks approached, she began to put the final pieces of her plan into place. She wrote detailed instructions for William and Catherine about Charlotte's education and preparation for her future role. She arranged for trusted historians to begin work on Mary Adelaide's official rehabilitation in the royal records. Most importantly, she prepared letters for Charlotte to read when she was older, letters that would guide her through the challenges ahead. The tiara remained in its secure location, but Elizabeth arranged for it to be cleaned and restored by the royal jewelers. When they examined it closely, they made an astonishing discovery. Hidden inside the setting, engraved in letters so tiny they could only be seen with magnification, was a message from Mary Adelaide to her unknown successor. Be the change you wish to see in the world, but never forget the price of change. Elizabeth knew then that everything was ready. Mary Adelaide's story would finally be told. Her tiara would finally find its purpose. And Charlotte would inherit not just a piece of jewelry, but a legacy of courage, compassion, and commitment to service that would guide her through whatever challenges lay ahead. The only question that remained was whether Charlotte would prove strong enough to carry the weight of history on her young shoulders, and whether the world was finally ready for a princess who embodied all of Mary Adelaide's dreams and Elizabeth's hopes for the future of the monarchy. September 8, 2022 arrived with the kind of Scottish autumn that Queen Elizabeth had always loved at Balmoral. But this morning was different. Elizabeth woke knowing that her time had come, and she had one final act to perform in the great drama of her life. She called for Charlotte to be brought to her immediately. William and Catherine, who had been staying nearby with their children, recognized the urgency in the Queen's voice and brought Charlotte to her great-grandmother's bedside without delay. What they didn't know was that Elizabeth had been planning this moment for years. Charlotte, now 7 and remarkably composed for her age, seemed to understand instinctively that this was a solemn occasion. She approached the Queen's bed quietly and took her great-grandmother's frail hand in her small, warm ones. "Charlotte, my dear one," Elizabeth whispered, her voice still carrying the authority that had commanded respect for 70 years. "Do you remember the stories I told you about Princess Mary Adelaide?" Charlotte nodded solemnly. "The brave princess who helped people even when it was hard." "I need you to promise me something very important," Elizabeth continued. "When you're old enough, you must tell the world about Mary Adelaide. You must make sure people know that she was a real princess, maybe the most real princess our family has ever had." Charlotte squeezed her great-grandmother's hand. "I promise, Gangan, but what about her tiara? Will I really get to wear it someday?" Elizabeth smiled, and for a moment, she looked like the young woman who had once promised her mysterious aunt that the truth would someday be told. "When you turn 18, the tiara will be yours. But more than that, her story will be yours to tell. You'll understand then what it really means to be a princess." These were among Elizabeth's final coherent words. She passed away peacefully that afternoon, surrounded by family, but carrying with her the knowledge that Mary Adelaide's legacy was finally in safe hands. The weeks that followed the Queen's death were a blur of ceremonies, protocols, and global mourning. But behind the scenes, something extraordinary was happening. In accordance with Elizabeth's detailed instructions, her private secretary began the process of revealing Mary Adelaide's story to a select group of trusted historians, journalists, and royal biographers. The reaction was immediate and profound. Here was a story that rewrote everything people thought they knew about the House of Windsor in the early 20th century. Here was a princess who had given up everything for her principles, who had lived a life of extraordinary service while being officially erased from history. William and Catherine found themselves at the center of a delicate balancing act. They needed to honor Elizabeth's wishes while protecting Charlotte from being overwhelmed by the weight of expectation. They decided to tell Charlotte the full truth gradually, allowing her to grow into her role as Mary Adelaide's heir, rather than forcing it upon her all at once. Charlotte herself seemed to understand that something significant was happening around her. She began asking more questions about Mary Adelaide, about the tiara, and about what would be expected of her in the future. Her parents were amazed by her emotional maturity and her ability to grasp complex ideas about duty, sacrifice, and service. One evening, about a month after Elizabeth's funeral, Charlotte asked her parents a question that stopped them in their tracks. "Do you think Mary Adelaide would be proud of how our family turned out? Do you think she would be happy that we're not hiding her anymore?" William realized that Charlotte had understood something profound about redemption and family legacy. She wasn't just inheriting a tiara and a story. She was inheriting the responsibility to heal a wound that had festered in the royal family for over a century. Meanwhile, the restoration of Mary Adelaide's tiara was proceeding under the careful supervision of the crown jewelers. As they worked, they discovered more hidden elements in its design. The arrangement of the gems wasn't random. It told a story in the symbolic language of Victorian jewelry. The progression from diamonds to pearls represented a journey from innocence to wisdom through suffering. The botanical motifs weren't just decorative. They represented the nations of the United Kingdom united in service to something greater than themselves. Most remarkably, they found evidence that Mary Adelaide had intended the tiara to be modified as it passed from one generation to the next. She had designed spaces in the setting where new gems could be added, each one representing a significant achievement or milestone in the wearer's life. It wasn't meant to be a static piece of history, but a growing testament to ongoing service and commitment. As Charlotte approached her 8th birthday, her parents began to involve her more directly in charitable activities. They were careful to present these as natural extensions of being a caring person rather than royal obligations, but they watched her responses closely for signs of the empathy and dedication that had characterized Mary Adelaide. Charlotte's response exceeded their expectations. At a visit to a children's hospital, she spent extra time with the children who seemed loneliest. During a food bank distribution, she asked thoughtful questions about why people didn't have enough to eat and what could be done to help them. Most tellingly, when she met a group of elderly veterans, she listened to their stories with the same respectful attention she had once given to Queen Elizabeth. It was during this visit with the veterans that Charlotte made a comment that convinced William and Catherine she was ready for the next phase of her preparation. One of the elderly men had been telling her about his service in World War II, and Charlotte had listened intently before saying, "I think being brave isn't about not being scared. I think it's about doing the right thing even when you are scared." Mary Adelaide was scared when she gave up being a princess, but she did it anyway because it was right. The veteran, who knew nothing about Mary Adelaide's story, was impressed by Charlotte's wisdom. But William and Catherine exchanged a meaningful look. Charlotte wasn't just understanding Mary Adelaide's story intellectually. She was internalizing its lessons and applying them to her own understanding of courage and service. That evening, they decided it was time to show Charlotte some of the physical evidence of Mary Adelaide's life. They brought out photographs that had been hidden for decades, letters written in Mary Adelaide's own hand, and even some personal belongings that had been preserved in secret. Charlotte studied everything with intense concentration. She was particularly fascinated by a photograph of Mary Adelaide working in a soup kitchen during the 1930s. In the picture, Mary Adelaide looked tired but content, surrounded by people of all ages who were clearly grateful for her help. "She looks happy here," Charlotte observed. "Happier than in the princess pictures." This insight revealed that Charlotte understood something crucial about authentic happiness versus performed contentment. She was beginning to grasp that Mary Adelaide's greatest joy had come not from royal privileges, but from meaningful service to others. As 2023 progressed, plans began to take shape for Mary Adelaide's official restoration to the royal records. The Royal Historical Society was preparing a comprehensive biography. The National Portrait Gallery was planning an exhibition about forgotten royal women. Most significantly, King Charles III himself had decided to acknowledge Mary Adelaide publicly for the first time in over a century. The announcement came during Charles's first Christmas broadcast as king. In a carefully crafted passage, he spoke about the courage of royal women throughout history, including those who served with distinction even when their contributions were not fully recognized at the time. He mentioned Mary Adelaide by name, describing her as a princess whose dedication to social justice and charitable service exemplified the highest ideals of royal duty. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. Here was a story of royal rebellion with a purpose, of a princess who had given up comfort to serve others. In an era when the monarchy was constantly defending its relevance, Mary Adelaide's story provided a powerful example of what royal service could look like when it was authentic and selfless. Charlotte watched her grandfather's broadcast with her parents, and when Charles mentioned Mary Adelaide, she clapped with genuine excitement. "Now everyone will know about her," she exclaimed. "She's not secret anymore." But Charlotte also understood that publicity brought responsibility. Over the following months, as media attention focused on Mary Adelaide's story and its connection to Charlotte, she began to experience her first taste of public scrutiny. There were articles speculating about her future role, photographs analyzing her behavior at public events, and endless commentary about whether she would follow Mary Adelaide's example. Charlotte's parents worked hard to shield her from the worst of this attention, while helping her understand that public interest was part of her life. They taught her that she could control her actions, but not how others interpreted them, and that the best response to criticism was to continue doing good work regardless. The approaching milestone of Charlotte's 9th birthday in 2024 brought new significance as plans solidified for her eventual inheritance of Mary Adelaide's tiara. The crown jewelers had completed their restoration work, and the tiara was more beautiful than ever. But more importantly, they had also prepared a complete documentation of its history, its symbolism, and its intended purpose. Charlotte was invited to see the restored tiara on her birthday. The viewing took place in the private apartments at Kensington Palace, with only her immediate family present. When the tiara was brought out, Charlotte's reaction was perfect. She showed appropriate reverence for its beauty and history, but she didn't seem overwhelmed or intimidated by it. "It's beautiful," she said thoughtfully, "but it's also sad." Mary Adelaide never got to wear it for what she made it for. William knelt down to Charlotte's eye level. "That's exactly right. But you know what? I think Mary Adelaide would be happy knowing that her tiara will finally be worn by someone who understands what it represents." Charlotte considered this seriously before asking, "When I wear it, will I have to make the same kinds of hard choices she made?" It was a remarkably mature question for a 9-year-old, and it showed that Charlotte understood the weight of the legacy she was inheriting. Catherine answered carefully, explaining that every generation faced different challenges, but that Charlotte would indeed have to make difficult decisions about how to balance her role as a princess with her desire to make a positive difference in the world. "The good news," William added, "is that you won't have to choose between being a princess and helping people the way Mary Adelaide did. Times have changed, and the royal family has learned from her example." Charlotte nodded thoughtfully. "So I can be both? I can wear pretty dresses and tiaras, but also help people who need help?" "Exactly," Catherine confirmed. "That's what Mary Adelaide always hoped would be possible someday." As Charlotte's understanding of her future role deepened, her parents began to introduce her to the practical aspects of royal service. She started attending briefings about the charities the family supported. She learned about the Commonwealth countries and their diverse cultures. Most importantly, she began to develop her own interests and passions within the framework of royal duty. Charlotte showed particular interest in education and children's welfare, causes that resonated with Mary Adelaide's own focus on helping young people achieve their potential regardless of their circumstances. She began to talk about wanting to ensure that all children had access to good schools and safe places to grow up. Her parents encouraged these interests while being careful not to push her in any particular direction. They wanted Charlotte's commitment to service to be genuine and self-motivated, just as Mary Adelaide's had been. They were pleased to see that Charlotte's passion for helping others seemed to come from within, rather than from external pressure. The summer of 2024 brought a significant milestone when Charlotte was invited to her first solo engagement, a visit to a primary school in London to read to children her own age. It was a carefully chosen event, low-key enough not to overwhelm her, but meaningful enough to begin establishing her public identity as a caring and engaged young royal. Charlotte approached the engagement with enthusiasm and natural grace. She listened attentively to the children's questions, participated eagerly in their activities, and showed genuine interest in their lives and dreams. Most tellingly, when one child asked her what it was like to be a princess, she answered, "It means I get to meet lots of interesting people and try to help make things better for everyone." The media coverage of Charlotte's debut was overwhelmingly positive, but more importantly, Charlotte herself seemed energized by the experience. She came home full of stories about the children she had met and ideas about how she might help similar schools in the future. That evening, as Charlotte was getting ready for bed, she asked her parents a question that revealed how deeply she had internalized Mary Adelaide's story. "Do you think Mary Adelaide would be proud of how I did today?" William tucked her in with a smile. "I think she would be very proud. You showed exactly the kind of kindness and interest in others that she believed princesses should have." Charlotte was quiet for a moment before saying, "I want to be the kind of princess she wanted to be. Not just wearing the tiara, but really understanding what it means." As Charlotte drifted off to sleep that night, her parents realized that Mary Adelaide's greatest victory was finally at hand. After more than a century, the monarchy had produced a princess who embodied all of Mary Adelaide's ideals: compassionate, principled, and committed to service, but who would be able to pursue those ideals within the royal system rather than in opposition to it. The story had come full circle. Mary Adelaide's sacrifice had not been in vain. Her tiara would finally fulfill its intended purpose, worn by a princess who understood that true nobility came not from birth or wealth, but from the courage to use one's privileges in service of others. And most importantly, the royal family had learned that their greatest strength lay not in maintaining rigid traditions, but in adapting those traditions to serve the needs of each new generation. Charlotte's journey was just beginning, but already it was clear that she would honor Mary Adelaide's legacy while creating her own path forward. The untold story had finally found its ending, not in tragedy and loss, but in hope, redemption, and the promise of a future where royal service truly served the greater good.